Talking with camp pros at conferences this fall, we've noticed a lot of similar issues folks are dealing with. Join us as we discuss key skills that require our focus for a positive and successful 2024 camp season.
Welcome to Camp Code, a podcast brought to you by Go Camp Pro. After 10 years of podcasting, is there anything left to say? Oh, you bet. Because just like people grow and change, so does our industry. Each and every year, there are new challenges, new ways of handling situations, new advice from those doing the work, and new ideas to share. Our commitment to intentional leadership training only has grown stronger. Join us for season 11 of Camp Code as we once again do all that we can to help you develop your best ever leadership training. And before we dive into today's topic, we'll do a round of introductions. So Beth, let's start with you today.
I am Beth Allison. I'm co-owner of Camp Hacker and Go Camp Pro. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a camp consultant and a trainer in Woodstock, Ontario, Canada.
Thank you much. And Gabs.
Hey, my name is Gabrielle, and I'm one of the camp directors at Camp Waro. And Camp Waro is an all-girls camp, and we focus on creating a positive environment for girls and gender minorities, and my pronouns are she, her.
Excellent. And I'm Ruby Compton. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Chief Exploration Officer for Ruby Outdoors Training and Support Company for Camps and Outdoor Programs, based in Western North Carolina in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And today's topic is key skills that we need to be teaching in 2024. And if you haven't listened to our Women in Camp Summit episode, I would recommend going back and listening to that because it will provide some good context for where some of this is coming from, as well as a really nice way to think about kicking off your training, as I know many of you are diving into really locking in on those training plans this time of year. So let's start with you, Beth. What's kind of at the top of your list or high up on your list for key skills that we need to be focusing on this year?
So I'm glad that you mentioned the Women in Camp Summit because I got this idea from the Women in Camp Summit. It was really brought home to me in a session led by Kelly Schuna, who also happens to be a host of the Camp Owners podcast. And she offered a great session on how to have difficult conversations with our staff. And the first indication that this is something we need to teach them in 2024 is that this room was absolutely packed. There were people sitting on the floor. There were people in the hallway listening. And yes, Kelly is amazing, but it was also a testament to how important these conversations are and how people are looking to learn how to do them well. So Kelly ran us through the session, explaining how she would teach it to her staff. And she also had us practice. And she discussed, of course, the fact that a positive, inclusive camp culture is absolutely paramount before you can have these conversations, that we need to focus on building relationships with our people and them with one another, that we need to teach our people that we have each other's best interests at heart and that we're really invested in them and their future success at camp. So that was kind of like, you got to have that in place before you get started on the other things. And she referenced one of my favorite TV moments, Ted Lasso and his famous Be Curious, Not Judgmental episode, as well as the concept of having this common language for these difficult conversations. I thought this was brilliant. So her camp uses the word rumble. So she teaches staff to say, hey, Beth, I need to rumble with you. And they practice saying this to one another in training. And so we had to practice with a partner saying, hey, I want to rumble with you. And you can use whatever word you want. She referenced a couple of others that people have used, like carefrontation or a walk and talk, whatever that you like. But the point is that the language signifies that this is an important and possibly uncomfortable conversation. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. She also talked about the body language that they use before they begin to rumble. So they practice this during training, right? So they both take a deep breath, they prepare to open up their hearts, and then they stand up tall. So they have strong backs. And then at training, they come up with opening phrases together that they could use to get these conversations started. So some of the ones were, the story in my head is, or walk me through, or help me understand, or I'm noticing that, or if things are getting really difficult in the middle of that conversation. So we're both dug in here. Tell me about your passion behind this. And she had us practice these sentences with a partner, just saying them out loud. We didn't finish them, but it was just naming the skill, giving the staff the language, and allowing them to build muscle memory by practice, I think is going to be a really key skill for 2024.
Genius. So good.
I
I
know.
was in the room next to that session. And the parts that I heard were fantastic.
Yeah. She's a very smart woman.
Awesome. Gabrielle, what's high up on your list for key skills that you're thinking about teaching this year to your staff this summer?
Yeah, I mean, it goes actually quite hand in hand with what Beth is talking about, and that's how to receive feedback.
Amazing, since we didn't talk about these ahead of time.
That is so true. No, it is actually quite wonderful. I think that it has changed. Providing feedback has changed. Receiving feedback has changed. And so with that in mind, this year in our application form, staff had those that are returning to us, not new to Waro, in their various of questions that they needed to answer, and they do a video answer for us, was on feedback. And we asked them, what out of these three things, which ones you want to work towards more? Do you want to work towards providing more feedback to campers, providing feedback to your peers, or providing feedback to your supervisors? And what I wanted to do was put them in the driver's seat of giving feedback, and so that they could think about it. So then when we were talking in their actual interview, we then also talked about how do they like to receive feedback, and how do they welcome it? Do they welcome it? Would they rather just run the other way and hide underneath their bed, which is also understandable. I'm a little bit like that myself. But our goal is to make it less taboo. And one of our leadership team members was talking about feedback in the sense that sometimes it feels like it's a personal attack, and that's what causes like, I'm trying so hard but I'm not getting it right, or these type of things. And she said, it'd be really nice if we come at it from a problem solving point of view. So it's really I've noticed this, have you noticed this, and let's problem solve together. And so for me, feedback, I think it's something to evaluate within our own organization, how we're doing it, how we're approaching it, how we're onboarding our staff, and also how are we onboarding our leadership team that are probably just as nervous to provide that feedback as well.
So smart, so smart. I once heard a talk that was given about feedback from Gracie Hansen. The idea of when somebody gives you a gift, we don't go, I don't accept this, ugh, right? And when that's the same thing with feedback, that we need to accept it graciously, as if it is a gift, even if it stings a little. That really shifted my thoughts on how we receive feedback and how.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting to hear in the videos who they selected. Like, I want to practice providing feedback to campers, peers, or staff. And the ones that chose peers or staff, I found usually started with, oh, I never really thought I could give my peer feedback or my supervisor feedback. So now that I'm thinking about it, that's actually something I want to work on. So I found that just giving the space to talk about it, I think is something that's quite interesting. But I know in the past couple of summers, I've tried to give people feedback. They don't want to hear it. Then when it comes to hiring time, their answers are typically, you never gave me this feedback. And I've been finding that quite frustrating. So now I'm beyond frustrated. Now I'm in problem solving mode. But this happened quite often. And it was like, well, it's very difficult to give you feedback, So we want to sort of shift that. But I think this is a across the board thing. I don't think this is my particular camp. I think everybody's dealing with this, and bringing them into that conversation hopefully is going to help. I'll stay tuned to post 2024 summer. We'll see how it worked out.
I can't wait to hear. I cannot wait to hear. Well, I love that y'all talked about feedback. So I'm going to take us in a different direction, which is back to the idea of just having conversations and small talk. And in some ways, that is a bit of a lost art these days that people are out of practice doing, because we don't do a lot of just like hanging out with people we don't know like we used to. So I just happened to today, scrolling on Instagram, heard from the account The Speech Prof. And if you don't follow this person, they're great. They put in so many great just life nuggets and about communicating with the world in so many great ways. And they gave this framework for having a conversation with someone or sparking a conversation with someone, which is OAR or. And Beth loves a good acronym. So here you go, Beth.
I do.
So number one is to make an observation. I've also heard this from Will Wise as what to ask them something about what they're wearing, sharing, or carrying. And so, oh, that's a really nice necklace you have there. Or tell me about that backpack. How do you like it? Or yeah, I heard you talk about your son earlier. Tell me more about him, right? Lots of ways that you can go with that, but just to make an observation and state an observation. And then after that, ask questions, whatever is your curiosity. And then lastly, to reflect back what you think you just heard them tell you. So I'm hearing you say that you're super into heavy metal. Like, tell me more about a band that you enjoy. It's just an easy little framework for thinking about how to enter, because I think so often we can get caught up in the awkwardness of like, what are they going to think? And I don't know, what if I ask them a question they think is dumb or whatever? So just make an observation. And I will say I've been practicing the sparking conversations with things that I've noticed people sharing, wearing, or carrying, and it has not failed me yet, mostly. So people like compliments. So I really like your necklace. Tell me more about that. Is it something special? Even if they're like, nah, I got it off the clearance rack. I'm like, cool. You like to be thrifty too. Tell me more about that. What are some other good deals you got? So it's just always a really nice entree point. All right, so at this point, we're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, and we'll come back and share some more key skills after that. For our Camp Code listeners, here's an exclusive offer to enhance staff retention year-round. Get UltraCamp's staff communication calendar with free customizable email templates at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. Remember what drew you to working at camp? UltraCamp knows it wasn't for the paperwork. That's why they've created an all-in-one platform to streamline your program management. You can say goodbye to the hassle of learning and managing multiple platforms to run your camp. And with UltraCamp, you can register and manage campers, generate and direct communication, organize schedules and activities, and process payments and donations. UltraCamp's goal is to help their clients spend less time in the office and more time doing what they love. Want to know if UltraCamp is the right fit for you? They offer free customized demo sessions so you can see their software in action. Sign up at ultracampmanagement.com/campcode. All right, and we are back. So Beth, we're going to come back over to you. What's another key skill you are thinking about for training staff on this summer?
So Gab and I went here. Ruby took us over here. I'm going back again a little bit for a second, but I think difficult conversations with staff and the ones that they will have with each other, whether there is conflict or it's during an eval or during a crisis, will require more work in 2024. I see more and more staff unable, not really unwilling, but unable to get into these kinds of conversations. So sharing conflicting ideas or other ways of doing things or how they feel, maybe how they messed up and owning it or asking for help. They seem stuck. So I think we need to share with staff some core components to be mindful of when we get into these kinds of situations, because we will, and we need to tell them that we will. And we need to tell them it's okay that we will, and that we can work together with them on it if we share the same goals, which is to make our relationship stronger and camp better for everybody else. And a lot of these can be found if you've read or listened to Brene Brown or Glennon Doyle, but clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Don't interrupt when people are sharing. That's a really hard one because I just want to get my point across because I know that what they're saying isn't accurate and I want to jump in there. So don't interrupt. Be self-aware of tone and energy. Use phrases like, I care about you enough to have this conversation. Or as a director or a supervisor, nobody took this job thinking they were going to suck at this. Or conflict is growth trying to happen. And as Ruby said already earlier, and it's a gift to be able to have this growth. So it's kind of giving them this foundational work to be able to have those difficult conversations, because no matter what happens this summer, no matter how much you front load or are intentional or brilliant, we're still going to have moments when there have to be some of these kinds of conversations. And these kinds of interpersonal skills need a lot of attention as we move forward.
Yes, this is tugging us away from our relationship as well. Surprising how some people just never really practice having those conversations, or they really hate doing it.
Right.
So when we can,
we'll just avoid them.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And like dragged in there, they might do it. Anyway, we're not going to get into my therapy session. Gabs, how about you?
Well, I think though what you're also bringing up is is providing the time during staff training to
Yes.
practice these things.
Yes.
Which is just, that's the key part. And anybody that's done years and years of first aid, you can go and be present for all the slideshows possible. But until you are practicing doing the first aid, gaining confidence is very, very it's very, very low. So having that experience, I think, is you have to feel it in your body, which brings me to my next tip, or topic, if you will. So when I was talking to, other camp professionals that have been around for a while, one of the main complaints that seem to be shared is that staff members, are having a difficulty following certain basic camp rules, and such as, their cell phone usage, or even wearing the proper gear, showing up on time, and breaking sort of bad habits has been quite difficult. And I will say I'm a culprit of being that camp parent to my staff in 2021, being like, I don't see the cell phone, I don't care. I'll deal with it in 2022, which I uncomfortably had to. And it
Yep.
was not fun for anybody. So this year, what we did, was provide a space for staff to actually practice not being perfect at doing all of these things, but there's an allotted time, which I called just basically elasticity space. So in the first group that came to camp, so our leadership team members, they practice not having their phones on them. They practice having their hair tied up. They practice wearing the proper footwear. But if they didn't get it, all the time, it didn't matter. The idea was that you practiced it. And then the evening before the next group that would come in, which is typically our activity heads, we would say, okay, as of tomorrow, there's no more practice time. I will give you that glance with my eyes saying, go put your hat on. But it's at this point, it's not acceptable. We actually have to role model for this next group. And so we did this spring, or this past spring. And from our leadership team to our activity heads, to our general camp counselors, to our CITs, to just becoming, with the campers arriving, everybody had this elasticity, and everybody had that conversation saying, we're role modeling it for the next staff members that are coming in.
So
And
smart.
it really made a difference. And what was really, really cool was when you had leadership team and activity heads practicing not having their cell phones, wearing the right gear, not shaming anybody that just arrived. I would give them the guidelines, but I also told them, this is your practice time. Nobody's going to get upset if you kind of accidentally, pull out your phone. Nobody's going to get upset if you don't have your hat. But as of this date, you need to be on board with also being on time. And it worked. It absolutely worked, because the majority of the group was doing it already, and they did have that practice time. So for
I love
me,
that.
I'm looking at creating more space that is being very, very transparent with what we're doing, but
Mhm.
actually giving the experience of doing it.
That's so smart. And I think the key point I heard out of that too was the speaking it very clearly. This is when this time changes, right? You have this practice time. And once again, reminding you that as of tomorrow, this is the real deal. We're playing the game for real. It's not a practice round. So
Yeah.
point.
And it also role models to our staff that elasticity is fine, that we don't expect you to be able to do something on day one immediately. So even running a program in the first week, and there's kids, you're like, whoops, that was a little bit wobbly. That's okay. but we have to learn from our mistakes. So the next time you're running that program. And the other thing it also taught was peer leadership. Like, we're on the same level, but I've been here for 2, 3 days more. Therefore, I don't have my cell phone on me. I do have my hat, and I'm doing that because I need to role model to my peers, and that's a value system. And that wasn't planned, but it certainly, I could see it during the summer have an impact, a positive one.
That's awesome. I love that. Great. I only have one more tip to share, and then I'll offer a chance if anybody else has any more to share. So mine is that we need to practice with our staff slowing down and focusing, because those are skills that are not rewarded in the world. And at camp,
So
we
true.
need folks to be able to slow down and take time, even when we have a hectic camp day or in a day camp day when time feels short and crazy. But the more that we can slow down and focus, the deeper the connections are going to be that we build with our campers, the more intentional we can be in our actions and in our words. And just helping deprogram the your worth is not based on your productivity thing. I think that's something we have a big opportunity to do at camp. And maybe that's something you pose to your camp staff. Your worth is not based on your productivity. What is your worth based on here at camp? And not only like you as a person and you as an employee, like what makes a staff member a strong staff member? These are the actions that we see. And keeping in mind that people may have worked in other jobs where they are rewarded for doing the most all the
Mm,
time.
yep.
And at camp, you cannot do the most all the time. You will not make it through the marathon. How do we help people practice the skill of slowing down and focusing on one task at a time, and knowing full well that at camp that we have to be focused, but we also have to have the peripheral vision on
Yes.
too, seeing everything that's going on. But we got to break apart those skills and get folks to practice each of the components and then start to put them together.
And not only will you not make it through the marathon, you're not role modeling well for your campers who are also growing up in a world that tells them you have to,
Yeah.
you know, be on all the time and doing, and that's where your worth comes from.
And I think that there's a bunch of camp pros that are listening to this podcast, like myself, who's like, but I am addicted a little bit to like doing
Yeah.
multiple things and going fast and getting stuff
Yep.
done, and I don't slow down. And if anything, also, or the summit that we were just at, the Women Camp Summit, that was also a theme that I don't think was spoken about that much, but I could see women having a very hard time just stopping and pausing. And it was very much like, what can I do? How can I help? I need to do this, And so, with what Beth is saying with role modeling to your campers as staff members, as camp professionals, the directors, leadership team, how are we practicing that first and incorporating it and making it visible to our staff? Because I think
Mhm.
we're the number one culprits.
Yes, I think
Yes.
so.
Yes. Not wrong.
Yeah.
Beth, did you have any other tips that you wanted to share?
I just have one little tiny one, and I don't really have ideas of how you need to teach it yet, but
Nice.
I will work on that. But in my day-to-day life in general, not so much in my camping world, I've noticed that folks are really struggling. Folks are angry and distrustful and feeling this disconnection we've been talking about. And I just think we need to have a really strong focus on social emotional skills at camp during leadership training. So things like self-esteem, like adaptability, like creativity, like empathy. We're having that hard time making connections, communicating our ideas, our thoughts, our feelings in a way that makes us feel understood, or feeling brave enough sometimes to even try to put them into words. And by we, I mean people in general, seem to be lacking practice these days in taking somebody else's perspective. How does it feel to walk in somebody else's shoes? And I think camp is an ideal place to offer young adults and kids an opportunity to practice these really essential lifelong learning skills. So, creating that culture of continuous development, of personal growth, the importance of these kinds of life skills. That's what I'm talking about this summer. camp people know how to make these kinds of opportunities fun and creative and as safe as we can. And I think that we need to put a lot of our effort into these skills this coming summer. Our world is hurting. And if every camp is working on social emotional skills, the ripple effect could be amazing. And I think we can help.
Awesome. Very good. Any other tips anyone wants to share?
I'll go off of that too. I just wrote down camp teaches kids to do hard things, a little Glennon Doyle sort of rip off. But I think that something that I also don't know exactly how to do, but starting the conversation with our staff about how camp does teach kids to do hard things and making that distinction between growth and being, slightly uncomfortable out of your comfort zone and being in, something that's emotionally or physically unsafe. And I've noticed that staff members not I never want anybody to be pushed, but I would say that sometimes there's a lack of encouragement. There's a lack of like, you've got this. And I think there's a fear that people are going to push, campers a little too hard, but maybe embracing that camp does provide a space that allows kids to do hard things will also translate to our staff, understanding that they're going to go through hard things during the summer. Being happy 100% of the time is not, this is not always the goal. Doing hard things, doing that with other people, feeling proud of the work that you've done. This is part of the process of happy. So I also don't know exactly how to do it, but I think with what Beth was talking about, even that piece of empathy, sometimes doing empathy is hard. It doesn't feel comfortable. It stretches you outside of yourself. And so
sure.
it's not just about pushing yourself in a I'm getting up on stage type way. Look, I'm trying to fight my panic zone. Like, no, not at all. It's being aware that to move things forward, sometimes we're uncomfortable. And how do we deal with that uncomfortableness, So, and how do we recognize uncomfortable versus being panicked? So, taking, what Beth is saying and also looking at it from a way that can be difficult that we do, but that's okay as we're trying to get to the summit. The hike is hard, but there's glorious stuff along the way.
I'm gonna throw back to an old Camp Code episode, which is a YouTube video I used to show was like 10 very awkward moments on live TV. And I would show that at the beginning of my conflict resolution session, and we'd watch it, and they're like painfully awkward. And most of them are pretty memorable things and involve relatively famous people who all went on to have careers after that. And especially in this world where it feels like you make one mistake and it's all over social media and you can never live it down, it still was like, yeah, but they carried on. And so I feel you being uncomfortable, and we can move forward. We will get to lunch today. It's not going to end the world. And that is one of the strategies that I've used to start with that discomfort. It's hard. Being uncomfortable is no fun. Awesome. All right. Well, Gabrielle, I think it's the recap time.
You know what I just did? Instead of pressing, unmute, I pressed the leave button on Zoom, and then it said leave meeting. I was like, wait a minute, wrong red button.
Please don't do that yet.
Yeah, I'm glad I did it. Recap key skills to teach in 2024. Obviously, there's a very long list of key skills that we could go after, but interestingly enough, talking to each other is one of the top key skills. And we all said it in many different ways. Ruby talked about small talk, which I still find myself feeling a little awkward, but I'm like, okay, let's embrace it because camp teaches hard things. Beth also was talking about having hard conversations. I also love the carefrontation little lingo there. I think we're going to be stealing that. And then at Waro, we're looking at how do we receive feedback. Beyond receiving feedback, Guess what? We all have to learn how to feel the feels and talk about those feels, angry, empathy, all those type of things. And Beth is trying to encourage us how to do that. She's also has her little hamster wheels going. And I'm pretty sure in the new year, we're going to have a whole acronym and an entire program on how to feel the feels and talk about it. And I'm excited about that. Slowing down and focusing. Bon, everybody, this is actually to camp directors. We're saying that staff need to do this, but we have to role model it. But it's true. We do want to do this. It's going to help regulate our emotions, get things done better. We all know this. I'm talking to those that don't take time off. Y'all need to take time off. And also, why don't we just practice things with a little elasticity? It's kind of grace, it's kind of kindness, but it's also a clear boundary on when we're setting expectations. We're saying, hey, you have time to practice, but you do have a job as well. There is practice time and then there's game time, and we have to put on our game faces. And that is our recap for today.
And I want you to know, for those of you who aren't watching this podcast, that when Gab was talking to camp directors, she did lean in. There was definite coming in for this conversation.
Listen up. I have a couple of camp directors in mind when I was saying that.
Perfect. Well, if you would like to get involved with our podcast, you can tell us your thoughts on this episode by using the hashtag CampCode. You can also tell us what topics you'd like for us to discuss, any guests you recommend we have on the show, any great leadership training tips you have to share. We'd love to hear from you because we are all about sharing in this industry. And if you found this podcast to be useful, please leave a rating and review for us in your podcasting app. Your feedback helps keep the show going. And I'm hoping a shocking number of people at conferences who've never heard of the Camp Code podcast. So spread the word. We want folks to hear about it and know about it because there's a lot of information over the years. We'd love for you to be in touch, and this is how you can reach us. Beth?
My email is beth@gocamp.pro, and I'm on Instagram, topaz_fae, F-A-E.
Thank you much. And Gabrielle?
You can get in touch with me at info@waro.com, or you can check out where I work at waro.com.
And you can email me, ruby@rubyoutdoors.com, or you can follow me on Instagram @rubyoutdoors. And we'd love to see you on our next podcast. The topic is to be announced, so you'll have to check in and see what that's going to be. Our final segment on each podcast is a best practice for leadership training, and we would love to hear some of your most memorable moments or most effective tips. You can tell us what they are using that hashtag CampCode. But this week's best practice comes from Beth.
It technically comes from Kelly Schuna. So in the end of that session where we talked about having difficult conversations, she talked about how to repair relationships with vulnerability if we have some of those hard conversations and they don't go very well on our end. If we as leaders screw up due to stress, to not thinking before we speak, to not getting all the information before we make a decision, we have all been there at one point or another. And Kelly gave us 3 phrases we can use to start the conversation when we go back to that person, be it right away or the next day or whenever we're ready to repair that relationship. And I think that they can role model great leadership with our people. So I want you to teach these to your staff, and I want you to also put them in your memory bank because I think that they just make a lot of sense. So the first one is, I didn't like how I handled that. The second one is, so that wasn't my best work. And the third one is, here's what I wish I would have said. And finally, Kelly shared that whenever we have to have difficult conversations with our people, we have to always look for the growth or the effort. And that will help us have the best perspective. So thank you for that wisdom shared, Kelly.
Yep, filing those away as well. So good. So good. Well,
She's
thanks
a smarty.
everyone. Thanks everyone for joining. Camp Code is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. You can check out all other podcasts at gocamp.pro/podcasts. And this year we do have a new one called The Pudding, because the proof is in the pudding. You can join Travis Allison and Dr. Mandy Baker as they share scientific proof to improve our staff recruitment and retention. And you can find the pudding in the Camp Hacker podcast feed. From all of us here at Camp Code, thanks for the listening, friends.